Welcome everybody to episode 115, I think it is, of Accents on Trial. Today we're going to be interviewing Annie. I'll bring her up. You said you go by Witchy Nanners, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. And you used to be a Christian?
Yeah, actually for 15 years.
15 years, okay. Yeah, so tell us a bit about yourself and your background and what your journey has been and where it's brought you to now.
Absolutely, yeah. So I am almost 30 years old. I will be on Sunday. I have a kiddo who's almost 8. I work full time, and I'm also a mom full time. I'm married. I spend all of my free time outside adventuring and doing things like that. Research is a huge thing for me. I'm constantly hungry for information, so my nose is either in a book or I'm outside in nature. Those are the two things. There's no in between for me.
Okay.
um when I was I would say about 5 6, I was adopted into a very conservative Christian household by my great aunt and uncle, which was the start of my religious journey. When I was, the start of my indoctrination with Sunday school, being told I was going to go burn for eternity if I didn't love and accept Jesus. Um, and at that age, you trust what the adults are telling you. So, I believed it. And then I'd say about around the age of 9, my adoptive mother informed me that both of my biological parents had passed on 2 separate occasions. Um, my mother to overdose, and then my father to suicide 6 months later. And in both individual instances, when she told me they had passed, she informed me that they had passed, that they would not be in heaven because of their actions while they were here on earth. And then I was never allowed to ask questions or have a space to properly grieve. Um, any of that. That has to do with the fact that my adoptive mother is an undiagnosed narcissist. 100%. I'd say she's diagnosed because the one time she did go to therapy with me, the therapist hinted that she probably was at least borderline narcissistic.
Yeah.
But, it is what it is. But yeah, so at the age of 9, my heart broke and shattered into a million pieces because up until that point, my parents had been in my life. My biological ones had been just in and out, because they were, not making the best life choices. But that didn't stop them from coming around every few months. And, as the, parents do, they love their kids, even if they're not able to care for them. It's a thing. So it wasn't like I was unaware that these people existed. They were my parents. I knew them as mom and dad, and I knew I was adopted. And so when they passed, it broke my heart that my parents weren't going to be in this all loving, wonderful eternity. And it made me severely question the faith that I was in at such a young age too, which I don't know a lot of people who started their deconstruction as early as I did. But life kind of made me grow up really early on. So I think that has a lot to do with why I started that process so early. But it made me start to question the faith. And over the course of the next 10 years, I spent truly seeking out God and Jesus and discovering and deconstructing my faith, asking the really hard questions to pastors and youth leaders and my parents, and never getting the answers. And I think that's where that hunger for knowledge came from, because I'm desperate to have answers because no one was answering them when I was a young kid. Going into my adolescence, and I needed the answers because I couldn't accept that my parents wouldn't be in heaven. And somewhere along the lines, I did truly want this faith to work for me. But about the age of 19, I got to a point where, after years of struggling with an eating disorder, due to purity culture and just the harmful tactics used just in general here for women, um, I got to a point where I couldn't live another day seeking out a God that clearly was not going to show up and answer my questions, show up and be there for me as I struggled through the things that I struggled through. Um, and it was such a hard thing, because for quite a while, I'd say a good solid 3 or 4 years, I knew that this faith didn't work for me, but I still believed in a higher power. And I really struggled with that as a person, because I'm like, how can I believe in a higher power but not want this higher power, if that makes sense?
Do you think that, if the people in your community had told you instead that your parents weren't going to be in heaven, that they would have been in heaven, do you think that the same kind of deconstruction would have taken place, or do you think that that was a catalyst for?
Um, no, I don't think it was a catalyst. Honestly, I think it was just, it triggered it sooner. Because as I got older, and I gained critical thinking skills and I saw things, um, I think honestly, all it did was start the process sooner,
Hmm,
instead of, later, when most people do end up going through it around 15, 16 is the
sure.
typical age I hear for deconstruction, is in, that primal, teenage years, when you're really learning who you are, because that's what your teenage years are about,
Yeah.
is finding out who you are. Mine just happened to start 7 years sooner than most, um, but yeah, at about the age of 19, when that like final nail for me, um, happened. And I know, like, a lot of people say they don't have a final moment. For me, there was a final moment. And it's when my adopted mother had said to me, when I had come out finally as bisexual, she came to me and she said that the way that I love is a lie and a joke, and that I would never go to heaven, and that I was no daughter of hers. And it was just this light switch, aha, final moment of, that final last domino that knocked every domino down. And I was like, why am I in this faith? What it promotes, what it supports, what the God has done, all of this research that I have done into the Bible and actually reading it from a non-biased point,
Right.
and everything I knew of the histories of what, Christianity and colonialization has done. I was like, why am I doing this? I cannot live one more single second subscribing to this faith. I can't do it. It's too much for me. And I said to her, I looked at her and I said to her, I said, well, that's okay, because I don't want anything to do with your Jesus or your heaven. And I went on for the next, I think, 3 years without speaking to her after that. And during
Yeah.
that 3 years, I did some pretty heavy soul searching, um, getting into things I probably shouldn't have, and then eventually landing on paganism, um, Celtic paganism to be specific, which is actually, my roots. I did some research into my family and found that we were, your stereotypical Irish farmer, potato farmers, and, even further back, we were very strong in the pagan community. And, as I started to look at my family, and I realized that a lot of our traditions, quote unquote, were just very heavily pagan. And I was just like, I asked my grandmother one day, I was like, do you know that some of these traditions can be seen as pagan? And she's like, oh, we know they are. We just at some point along the lines converted, but held on to the traditions and carried them on and passed them on. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But I've been Celtic pagan ever since, dabbling, here and there, and researching other things, because I'm constantly hungry for knowledge and, answers and things. And I will say this is probably one of the funniest things I think about myself, um, with my belief system, believing in the old Celtic pagan ways. I still am very much a believer in science, you know? And I can say without a shadow of a doubt, I know that science contradicts my beliefs, and I'm okay with that. It's more of this cultural thing more so than anything else. Um, so I've never really had an issue when someone says to me, "Oh, that's not real." I'm like, "Okay, cool. It probably isn't, but I enjoy it." So,
So I want to take this moment to just kind of going back to what you were saying about uh, having your love called fake, and the threat of hell put on you, and all this horrible
mhm.
abusive things. You know, when Christians and Muslims complain to me about, you know, why is it that you know, put the time that you do to attack us and
Hmm.
criticize our beliefs and disrespect our beliefs, why can't you just go about your day? It's because of stories like this. It's because
Exactly.
religious people can't shut the fuck up and keep their beliefs to themselves. They have to then use them to harm other people.
Others, yeah.
Yeah,
I have a firm belief in all my time, especially since starting lives on TikTok and stuff, and actually interacting with Christians, because that's something that I have noticed since leaving the faith. I didn't interact with Christians anymore, and since starting TikTok in the last 6-8 months, I have started interacting with Christians again, and um, something that I'm really like firm on this in everything I've seen is I think it stems from an insecurity two ways. I think that when they attack, it's a type of projection,
yeah,
because especially when it comes to like the deconstruction part of things, when they're like, oh, you were never really a true Christian or a real Christian, or you were never really saved. I think that stems from an insecurity that they feel that it could happen to their faith too,
100%. Yeah,
and that shakes them because that's their whole foundation, their whole personality, their whole everything, and that's terrifying. And I get it, because I remember feeling so scared when I first started realizing that I don't think that this faith works for me. During my deconstruction process, it scared me, and I got even more indignant to things, and I became very self-righteous and very preachy and very pushy about my belief system, to the point where it was toxic.
so we're compensating for this
Exactly,
anxiety. Yeah,
exactly. And that's a really big thing that I've noticed is that behavior. I think honestly, because I look back at my own personal journey and I see that, I'm like, it's because I was so scared of what next step because it was one of those, you don't know if there's a next step or you're gonna fall or what. And it's scary because your whole life is wrapped up in this faith in the community. Because I grew up in a mega church. So like it was it was hard because I knew that I was going to lose my support system,
right.
my family, my friends, everything I ever knew. And that was horribly terrifying because I started over brand new, you know?
I feel like a lot of people stay in those communities even when they stop believing
Hmm.
because they're afraid of losing everything that they've known.
Yeah, it's
Um,
scary. I know several people that I know don't actually believe, but they're there because the community works for them and it's safe. And I'm not against that at all, because we need people to be safe. I'd rather save people than hurt people, as long as they're not then in turn hurting others.
right.
Um,
I want to go back to what you said a few minutes ago about and maybe you can tell us more about the Celtic pagan belief system because I'm curious. I don't know much about it.
Absolutely.
Um, but if more people, and like what you said, you're into science, and if somebody comes and tells you, hey, like this belief doesn't actually align with what we know is to be true,
Mhm.
that you're okay with that. Like you're okay with either updating the way you view the world, or that you take this more, sounds to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, metaphorically, that there is a cultural value to this uh, belief system. It's something you enjoy, but it's not something that you necessarily take as like, you know, uh, perfect truth of some kind.
So it's more of a symbiotic type thing where I think that we as a human race, a human like species, had religion to explain away the things that we couldn't. Things like, why does the sun rise at this point every day? Why does it set? And we came up with things like the sun gods and the moon gods, and then etc., so on and so forth, to explain away the things that we didn't quite have the science for yet. Um, and it's kind of a weird thing because I 100% believe in the concepts of evolution and science creating things. But then there is a piece of me that does believe in the mystics and the, you know, things like as silly as, maybe it's just my inner child that I'm trying to heal still. I don't know, but I'm okay with it. But it's the like, oh yeah, unicorns totally exist. So do my gods. but science also created everything, and science can explain literally every phenomenon that we have. And I think that I have found this balance of understanding that science can explain everything in most ways. But for me, I cling to these old ways and the concepts of these deities as something that is um, soothing my soul, if I have a soul. But whatever that piece of me is, it helps, calm that piece of me. And it is heavily a cultural thing. It
Yeah.
is a family thing. That I now am able to connect with certain family members that I wasn't before because of how religious because my adoptive mom was the only one that was like evangelical Christian. The rest were like your stereotypical, you go to church on Sunday and that's it,
Mhm.
kind of Christians, where it's like God exists, very agnostic or very, deist, where, we're not sure, but it maybe, I don't know, kind of God belief system. Um,
Yeah.
and then there's quite a few that still very much practice, a lot of the old ways and such. So it's
I
kind of a symbiotic relationship of I know science is real and it exists and it's important, but also like I like my unicorns and the idea of, the mystics.
Yeah, it seems like it's a kind of more of like a tool for certain kind of comfort in a way.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. And it's mine to believe, and I don't really care if anyone else believes it or not, because I do, and
Right.
that's enough for me.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that, like on a rational level, like just like I understand the meaning of the words you're saying.
Yeah.
Um, it's something that for me on an emotional level, I I can't really relate to, because for me, belief doesn't really ever have to do with comfort.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah. No, I see that 100%. I think you've chatted with my brother. He goes by Evangelical Daddy on TikTok.
mhm.
That's my older brother.
Oh,
Me and
cool. Okay.
him, 100% polar opposite beliefs. He's very agnostic, atheist, science all the way. There's no mystics, no nothing.
Yeah.
And my husband's the same as well, And so
Mhm.
it's just you believe what you believe, and I'm all for that, and I
Yeah.
believe what I believe. And I think that we all have our own way of viewing things, and as long as we're not harming others, I could care less.
And that's the thing, right? Like I might always have like an intellectual disagreement with, like belief based on like reasons of comfort. Like I
Mhm,
might feel like, well, I can understand the utility, but its utility has little to do with its truth value. I
mhm.
don't understand, I don't think it justifies the belief.
Yeah.
But if a person doesn't care, and as long as a person is not using any belief to hurt themselves or others,
Oh, absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
not relevant to me.
Yeah.
Uh,
Because it's mine, and I don't really care what anyone else thinks, because it's like I'm not going to be like your stereotypical nationalist Christian who would go and want to make it laws. That's silly. But as long as like I'm still allowed the space to go practice my things, and I'm allowed to celebrate my holidays, and that's about as far as I go. Don't infringe on my ability to do so.
right, exactly.
Otherwise, do your thing. I'm going to do it by myself until I find other people who are like-minded.
And what are some of the details of the ideology? Like, um, what is Celtic paganism?
Yeah, so Celtic paganism specifically, the idea of paganism is a polytheistic belief system, which is the belief in multiple gods or deities, that essentially was at one point a slur that the Roman Catholics used against the rule belief systems that fell outside of what aligned with the Catholic Church or the Abrahamic faiths. So Judaism, Islam, and Catholicism, and then the Christianity that falls underneath that umbrella. Um, and it fell outside of that. And, as a society, we've grown, we've expanded that. That description is more of anything that fell outside of the mainstream belief systems. So your Abrahamics, the Buddhist beliefs, and the Hinduist beliefs. Anything else technically is considered pagan. So it's just a not stereotypical, not common belief of the rural areas. So, say in the Celtic territories, which covered Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and it went down as far into parts of Britannia and into France. dependent on who you ask, because it's been widely like disagreed on and talked about, because I mean, it was a couple hundred years ago. But and then you have ones like the Slavic paganism, you have Greek, you have Norse, native United States natives. They had their own version of their belief systems, and so on and so forth. The Mayans, the Incans, all of these belief systems that they followed would be considered pagan. But for Celtic specifically, we believed in, there's so many different deities, but I'll name a few, like Danu, Dagda, the Morrigan, just a few off the hand, deities that controlled and explained why things happened. And there's an origin and a creation story. There's holidays throughout the year, things for, like we just had Orstra, which is the new spring time for the spring equinox to start the new year, essentially. To start crops, et cetera, et cetera. We have one for May Day. We have one for the summer solstice, one for Halloween, which is our essentially All Souls Day, Halloween, which is our Day of the Dead. Essentially, most cultures have a Day of the Dead, Remembrance Day. And then like our winter holiday, and it was just one of those, hey, bring us, a smooth winter, don't, so that we can get to the crop time kind of holiday. And it was, big bonfire and drinking and all that good stuff, which, funny enough, Catholicism / Christianity did latch onto that holiday, and they kind of took over it and made it into what we now know as Christmas. And with Oistra, it's now Easter, and they've changed it from this fertility spring holiday to the rebirth of Christ, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the holidays and practices that we do see in modern day Christianity was essentially, it was a process called syncretic cultural transfer, where when they and that's a nice way of saying cultural appropriation. But when they located in that area near the Celtic and the Slavic and the Norse pagans, they saw these different holidays and they're like, ooh, we like those. What's the best way we can get these people to come to our faith? Let's also share their holidays. And then there was a fear tactic used, and, typical colonialization,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's very connected with Earth, and that life is to be enjoyed, not suffered, and fear of one day burning in eternity. We have a concept of an afterlife, and it's kind of wish-washy, more or less. We aren't essentially going to go there one day based on our behavior here. It's just a place our deities came from, etc. It's more of a, you live and you die, and that's that. Some do believe in reincarnation as
I
well.
was gonna say, yeah, like, what is the view of the afterlife? Yeah.
I think it depends on the pagan that you ask. I personally do believe in reincarnation, just for personal reasons of, I want to be a tree really bad. The idea of being a tree just sounds so cool. But there is a concept of an afterlife, and it's more or less not an afterlife, but an other world. It's direct translation from the old Irish language, and it was called Tirnanaug, which translates to the other world, and that's just the realm of where the deities reside, essentially, kind of like Mount Olympus. If you catch my drift, it's just a place that you can go, and there's a possibility you get to go there, but it's question mark, because unfortunately, what knowledge we have of the old ways of the Celtic beliefs and practices and things were slim to none, because they didn't have a recording, a way to record our practices and things. What we do have down in writing was from monks in the area that studied the cultures themselves and wrote it down. Win for us on somewhat of what the Christians did do for us, even though they tried to eliminate us. Their monks were super obsessed with knowledge, and so they wrote down things for us. So that's how, between that and then word of mouth and tradition being passed down through generations, is what we have. So it's highly debated, what is and isn't, so.
What would you say are some of the most common misconceptions about Celtic paganism?
Specifically that we're devil worshippers. We really don't have a concept of, and I feel like Christians do struggle with the concept that their faith is not the default, And so they're like, oh, you're a Satan worshiper, and that means you're going to go to hell. And it's like, well, me as a Celtic pagan, we don't really have a concept of hell, and technically you don't either.
Right.
The concept of hell that you have is based off of a poem, and it's nothing like what it was originally in the Torah and such. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Torah, however you say
I
it.
think it's Torah.
Torah. But it's not at all what you think it is, and yours is a mushed up version of what you took from Judaism and then made it what you did with Dante's Inferno.
Sure.
And it's like, we don't have this fear of a burning place, so it's like, one, we don't even truly believe in your Satan, and we know that me as on a theologist side point, I know that the word Satan is actually a title, not a name. And if you actually study the Bible, it talks about multiple satans. It's a title. It's just the oppressor, or not the oppressor, the opposition, the the opposite of that deity, of that faith.
It's amazing how many people who say they're Christian don't know their own Bible.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
it's
every
in the
day.
history. Yeah.
And that's something that is one of my biggest struggles, is when someone comes in and tries to tell me how I was never a true Christian, but then can't even have a real conversation with me about the immorality of their own God. And they're like, our God is perfect. What are you talking about? I'm like, you're dude, at least in Old Testament, which is heavily where he's talked about, the focus in the New Testament has nothing to do with that God. That God is in the Old Testament, and he was vengeful. He was evil. He unalived. I'm talking in TikTok still.
Mm-hmm.
he offed kids like it was a Tuesday, and it was no sweat off his back.
It's amazing how the cognitive dissonance. I recently had a back and forth with a Christian woman who claimed that I was misrepresenting her because I said that she condoned genocide.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the same breath, literally a sentence later, she justified God drowning the world because God has the right to do what he wants over his creation.
Because he's God, yeah.
It's that's not an answer. That's not a justification. No. You're literally just saying, hey, I support tyranny because God can do what God wants.
Because God can, because it's God. And I feel like that's one of an issue that I do have with the concept of Christianity and how it's been portrayed and how it is today, is the lack of accountability. They'll do anything to remove accountability from their God. And in turn, it's been manifested in their faith and in their churches and in their people that accountability doesn't exist. You can do and say whatever you want as long as you go say sorry to Jesus and say that he's your savior. You're fine. And I feel like that removes all accountability from actions, and I hear this from a few of family members myself, because I have completely removed my adoptive mom due to her abuse and talking back on, things she did to me as a kid, now that I'm an adult with my own child, I'm like, whoa, I'm never going to let that near my kid.
Yeah.
But, looking back at that, it's like, there's no accountability at all. And it removes it. And it's like, that's awful. Why is there no accountability anywhere?
The explanation they try to use is, well, God gave us free will.
Oh God.
It's like, that's not a response. Why is that a good thing? One, God doesn't care about free will when he does intervene and drown the world.
Intervenes. And also, if you actually read the verse that they're talking about, it doesn't say free will. They're talking about freedom. You have the freedom to act as you please, I can read the verse verbatim if you'd like, but it doesn't talk about free will to do these things. It talks about the freedom. So the concept of free will doesn't even exist because it can't exist. There's no way that free will can exist in our world. It doesn't.
But even if it did, it wouldn't resolve the problem.
No, not
Because
at all.
one, again, like God intervenes and doesn't care about free will when he intervenes. Two, he could have
Especially
intervened.
when it pushes his own agenda to do what he wants. I mean, he's proven to us in the Old Testament that if he wants to intervene and stop certain evils by his standard, he will. Sodom and Gomorrah, the flood, with Moses.
But he
But
could have stopped those evils without without spilling a drop of blood.
exactly. I mean, even if he had to spill a drop of blood, why not just handle the Pharaoh and then let the people go?
Yeah, exactly.
Why not just change the hearts of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, or just deal with the evildoers in Sodom and Gomorrah and let all the innocents go? Same with the flood. Like, why do we have to do such drastic things when you're this all-powerful God, but you're not?
But also, why is this idea of free will like a good thing? And also Christians don't believe that in heaven there is the free will remains, because we can't sin in heaven supposedly.
Yeah.
Why is it all of a sudden a necessary thing to have on earth, but we can't have it there? Why couldn't we have been free to just choose between an infinite amount of good choices? They think that God is free and all good, supposedly, even though all the evidence points to the opposite.
Yeah.
And yet, we can't still be free, but only free to choose the good. Doesn't make any sense.
Right. And I want to touch on that whole no free will concept in heaven. If you look at that from an outsider's perspective, how messed up that really is, and how just, oh my God, like, and if you think about it, that's intentionally how God wanted it. He didn't want us to have free will. He didn't want us to have critical thinking skills. He didn't want us to have the ability to make our own choices, because he wanted us to just be these little puppets. And if I want to play into their creation story and the way they see things, I'll go as far as to say is that their concept of the devil and the serpent is who actually gave them free will, not your God, because he never intended for them to have critical thinking skills or free will. And you only gain that because of the serpent. So, like, your God didn't actually give us free will at all. And he doesn't care about free will because he's proven how many times he'll intervene. And if you read the chapters about the story of Moses and how many times homie says he's going to harden the Pharaoh's heart,
right,
just so that he can do his plagues. Like, that's all he want to do. He's like, nah, dude, nah, you can't soften now. I still got 9 more plagues to go. Like, make it make sense. It doesn't to me, and I don't think it ever will. Even as someone who identifies as a theist, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And again, when I run these arguments with Christians and Muslims, they just don't seem to connect the dots. And I don't understand how. To me, it doesn't seem to be that complicated. It's like, if evil came to be, it's because God allowed for the circumstances which would give rise to it.
Yeah.
So how can we say that we're to blame if this is the world that God created?
Right.
And yeah, it just doesn't add up ultimately.
No, not at all. Because, they want to talk and say that he's this all-powerful and all-loving God. So if that's the case, why wouldn't he from the start make us to be perfect beings to just coexist with him if he truly loved us? If I had the ability to remove any bad choices from my child and make sure that he lived a perfect life with no badness, I would do it if I had the power. But I don't. I do my best to make sure we can avoid the bad choices. But unfortunately, in this world that we live in, there's going to be bad choices. There's going to be bad things. My only job is to, hand him the tools to handle it, because I don't have the power. But if I did, I would not be all loving if I had the ability and didn't. You can't be both. It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
I mean, I can understand the value of certain kinds of suffering, but not all kinds of suffering. Like there
Yeah.
are certain types of suffering that nobody should ever go through or
Mhm.
experience.
Oh no, you
Uh,
tripped and skinned your knee. Okay, now we know how to walk better or ride our bike better.
right.
Beautiful. But things like the Holocaust, things like SA,
Exactly. Yeah.
things like, just any type of harm done to innocents,
Yeah.
it's not okay and not should never be seen.
And it's like they don't hold their God to the same moral standard that they hold other people. Like
Mm-mm, not at
if
all.
a Christian knew that somebody walked by and let a rape happen,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
would judge that person.
they
But
would.
suddenly, oh God, it's fine if God does it because God works in mysterious ways.
Hmm.
It's insanity.
Well, and that's that. They'll start talking about, oh, it's the trials and tribulations to test you. I'm sorry, what kind of narcissism are you
Yeah.
into? Because that's all that is this special brand of narcissism. I don't know if you can hear how bad the sirens are outside my house right now.
Yeah, I can hear a little bit. But yeah, if anybody in the audience has any questions for me or guest, um,
Okay, I think they passed. That was intense. Apparently, there's some going down in town because I never hear sirens that bad. Uh,
Kanasami makes a good point. They said we can't question God's ways, or you're looking at things through the human lens. Christians say this, but it doesn't mean anything. Yeah, it's just a way to evade the problem. It's basically saying shutting down your brain and saying we don't have an answer for this, so let's just pretend like it's not an issue. Let's just look the other way.
yeah, so again, that's just removing accountability from your God. You don't hold him to a different standard. And I'm sorry, but if you're looking to have a moral base, you can't look at your God because he lacks all of the morality you try um to have. You sit here and say that murder is bad, and yet your God does it so much. The body count technically through your Bible in comparison, where oh my God, why hold on, I'm so sorry.
No worries. No, I hope everything is okay over there. Um, yeah, like I was saying, if anybody has anything that you want to bring up or ask or want me to read on the stream, just leave it in the comments. And also, I'm waiting to hear back confirmation, but I should be doing another episode tomorrow with
Okay,
another
hopefully
Christian who's
they
going
pass
through
now.
the conversion, and then I think that on Monday I'll be hosting a debate on evolution, and potentially Friday I might be hosting a conversation on presuppositionalism with a Christian on here. So more content coming your way. But yeah, what were you saying, Annie?
Yeah, so I don't even remember where I left off. Craziness outside my apartment. I think I was talking about the narcissism and
Yes.
how
Yes.
there is lack of accountability. But yeah, you sit here and you say one of your morals is thou shalt not murder, and yet your God does it all the time. And then they'll turn around and say, well, it's because of Satan. And it's like Satan's body count is like 6,
Right.
and it
Right.
was Job's family because God dared him to.
Right.
Whereas God's body count is in the billions when he, eliminated the world
Yeah.
and restarted it, and did so many things and unalived so many people constantly. And I mean, people want to try and say, oh, it was the people. Well, when we talk about the story of Moses and the flood and Sodom and Gomorrah, all of that was directly from your God who did these things. He
Right.
specifically did these things, and you can't use him as a moral base and then remove all accountability from him. It
Right.
doesn't work.
Yeah. It's nothing but supporting of tyranny. There's
Hmm.
nothing about an authority that justifies what that authority does to people. Just because you give this idea, this being, the title of God, doesn't mean that God is an evil if he's genociding the entire
Hmm.
world. Like it just doesn't make
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. And like it'd be, in my opinion, it would be a completely different story if this God didn't claim to be all loving. If he was like, I
Right.
am an all powerful, vengeful God, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, I'd have respect for that. Like, yeah, that's shitty, but also go off, because at least you were honest about who you are and what you do. I have, like, there's no surprises,
Right.
because when you sit here and say, I'm an all loving God, even though I've unalived all these children, it's contradictory.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Is there? Let's see. So you said that since then you've cut off kind of the toxicity in your life.
Yeah. Within, I think it was November-ish of 21, I officially cut off my parents, because they, for whatever reason, have learned to accept that my brother is not. And I think it's because he identifies as just an atheist or an agnostic atheist, and I feel like that's easier for them to swallow and consume.
Mhm.
Whereas me, I am like fully 100% out there. I am a Celtic pagan witch, and they're like, oh no, no, and I'm bisexual on top of it, and they're just like, it's too much, you have too many things, it's too much, just be quiet, just don't talk about it. They would rather me just be in a corner than being loud. Also, I've never been one to be quiet about their abuses and whatnot, and like, they've never liked that,
Right.
because once I got some kind of critical thinking skills, I immediately started calling it all out.
Sure.
And so, yeah, about almost 2 years ago now, I cut them out completely. And my goodness, how every department of my life, every area, just went from this dark, gloomy space to this bright, filled room of, I can breathe. There's real air in here. It's not being suffocated, and
Yeah.
I saw every aspect of my life improve once removing myself from the toxicity. And I think one of my biggest issues with a lot of Christians is because they claim to be these loving people, but on the flip, they act like this,
Right.
and
Exactly.
almost every single female or woman, or any like one that identifies as female, that has also been through the similar deconstruction, have the same story of this narcissistic mother who pushed the purity culture on us so heavily, and like did these things, and there was this like sense of jealousy of from our mothers and how they treated us. And it's such a common uh, like system that happens.
Well, this is a good point. I personally don't set my kids up for failure as a test and then punish them when they do fail.
Ooh,
The
yeah.
entire Christian concept is ridiculous to me. Can't believe I was one for so long. Also, what you just said reminds me of a conversation I just had. And, I have a friend of mine who is a Christian, and I'm not going to say who it is, but there's a part of me that feels very saddened by the way in which their ideology makes them view life. Um, we're talking about the patriarchy. We're talking about the fact that this religion is grounded in men controlling women.
Yeah. Oh,
But they
yeah.
don't see it that way, because the way they see it is that they're not giving up control to men. The way they see it is that God has created these roles,
Yeah.
and
And
that
that
these
we're
roles
supposed to.
are in harmony,
Yeah.
and that they're working together, and that they're giving up control to God and not to men. And in
Yeah.
my mind, I'm going, you've drank the Kool-Aid. You've bought into what men are trying to
Yeah.
told you is God's will, as opposed
Yeah.
to actually what the case is.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's such a heavy thing, because there is a lot of talk in the Bible and within several churches about how women aren't allowed to be pastors and they're not allowed to preach. They can't do this. And how, heavily within the purity culture, how we're taught as young girls. I mean, it starts as young as 7, 8, 9 years old, how we are literally here to submit to our husbands. We are here to make them happy and to push their careers and push them to do their godly thing. And we're just here to support them and submit to them. And it's just blindly accepted. And it's just like, what about me? What about my career? And I have, so my husband has a very good friend who at one point when we first got married said to us, now you're one person. And we both looked at each other, and we both had just, when we got together, had previously both been married, and both horrible people we were married to. And we both were like, oh my God, no, we are our own people together in one relationship, but we are separate entities with separate viewpoints,
That's how it
with
should
how
be.
we see things, how we want to do things, what we do. We may come together for certain things, but we are our separate humans with separate lives that we just we are sharing together. And that was something that always bugged me growing up once I hit the teenage years, was I want to be my own person. And I feel like that ideology set me up for my very abusive first marriage, because I fell into that trap of, I'm supposed to submit to my husband. And it didn't help that as I was going through it, I had my mother telling me that it was okay, that I just needed to be a better wife. And that's why these things were happening. And it's like, this person is hurting me badly, and my child is seeing it, and I need out, but you're my only out, and you're not hearing me because
Right.
your faith has taught you that this is my role and that I did something to make it happen. That is so dangerous.
100%.
Women have died because of that. we I suffered abuse because of this ideology, because I was so indoctrinated. Even though this happened after I had left the faith and I was already on my deconstruction journey, I still was so set up to fail 100%, because I was never taught what an actually healthy relationship is supposed to look like. Because in every aspect of Christianity, toxic relationships, toxic love,
Right.
toxic forgiveness exists, and
It's really sick.
it's
Yeah.
sick. It is, I was a young girl, so naive to everything. Even though I had some knowledge, I was still so naive to it all, and I had no one to help me, and I had to figure it out myself. And I think that that's like the primary reason why I do what I do with my platform, is because I don't want to see a 22-year-old girl
Yeah.
freshly walked away from the faith, or still in the faith, go through the things I did. Maybe I can be that lifeline, because no one was a lifeline for me, you
Right.
know? And
I think that's really great what you're doing, for sure.
it's an important thing, I can't not, it's the people pleasing people, people pleasing in me. Like, I can't let this person drown because I did and barely made it out. So someone else has to be here, throwing the lifeline out.
I guess this would be a good segue to, you maybe want to plug in your plug your social media, TikTok.
Absolutely. How do I go about doing that? Did I just say it,
Yeah,
or?
just say it.
Okay,
And
yeah. So if anyone wants to follow me, I'm on TikTok and Instagram. Eventually, I'm gonna be on YouTube, but under the handle across the board, it's Witchy Nanners, just like it shows on the screen right here. Um, Across the board, both Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I do most of my stuff on TikTok, and then Instagram a little bit. I'm trying to grow it a little bit. Still on the smaller side, but that's okay because we're growing.
great. There's a question here for you. How much do you feel the difference in spiritual religious views you have with your husband has enriched your relationship? Does it encourage deeper conversation? Does it ever cause disagreements?
Ooh, that's a really good question, because my husband is agnostic, atheist, or just purely agnostic. He kind of is unsure, and he likes to joke a lot. We don't really have disagreements, but we definitely hit points where we butt heads in some ways, of like, I'll be talking about something on the mystic side and he'll roll his eyes and he'll be like, that's not real. And I'm like, buddy, I don't sit here and tell you that what you believe is wrong, so you don't get to do it to me. And he's
Yeah,
like, I know, I just like teasing you, and I know it gets a rise out of you. And I'm like, that's not right,
that's how that works.
But
Yeah.
it's more just, that haha banter back and forth between, spouses and all that. But like, I think it does, because I think it's allowed us in a way to see that we are individual people,
Mhm.
because we came from such horrible relationships prior. I was heavily codependent, heavily abused. It was very scary. I was isolated. And then, within a year, I met him. Well, re-met him. I went to high school with him, but re-met him and was reintroduced to him. And with him, he had been with his spouse even longer. I was only with mine for about 5. He was with his for 10. They were together from high school on. They met their senior year of high school, and they were together ever since. And for him, it was heavily a being used, you're here for me when I want type of relationship. And so it's allowed us to have our separate entities or separate identities and our separate lives of, this is what I'm interested in, and this is my center, and you have your center, and we can be different. And I think that since we've been together, I've noticed, at least for myself, and he agrees for himself, that we've seen those areas flourish where we're more confident and comfortable with these centers, where we're able
that makes some sense.
to do it more,
Yeah, I think that I think it's a good thing when you can both be your own person and work together and have similar values, but also be different enough that you can challenge each other and still have interesting and challenging conversations. I think those are the best types of relationships.
Oh yeah, because we're not 100% the same. We are able to bounce ideas off each other. And I think it's hilarious because one of the few areas we do 100% agree on when it comes to theology and the concept is that we come from the stars, and that's something that we both are very we once were stardust and now, we're here. And I think that that's actually really cool that we do have common ground, that area between our two. And we've just both got our, separate sides, but we can meet in the middle in some aspect.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Good to hear that. Does anybody else have any other questions you want to ask us? And do you have anything else that you want our audience to hear about?
Oh man, I think right now, this conversation needs to be heard so heavily, and it needs to be continued to be talked about because I had posted a video, I think within the last couple of days, about how Christianity and colonialization has done such harm. And I think that we need to pay attention to the things that have been done in the past, the fear and hate that we saw at one point, from Christianity, and still, over time it's seen, but it seemed like it had dwindled down within the last, I'd say 20 to 50 years, somewhere in there. But I mean, not fully, but you know what I mean? It's dwindled down. And we're seeing such a rise in it again right now in the United States with what's happening with the queer community and the LGBTQ and all of these laws and things, and how important it is that we keep church and state separate. And I don't think that Christians truly understand how important it is for them too, because it protects them as well as the rest of us. It doesn't just protect us from having laws be made by them. It also protects them by not having laws made to control them as well. It's supposed to be a balance of, you have your belief system, you have your doctrines, you have your churches, but you don't get to force it, and I think that is something that needs to be talked about, because we can have differences of beliefs and ideals and things, but at the end of the day, these are real people's lives that matter, that are being affected, and it's so incredibly frustrating to see what's happening in our nation right now with Christian nationalism. It's scary.
It is, but I do feel like it is the last, how would I say this? I think Christians of that kind are recognizing that power has been stripped away from them.
Yeah.
And I think this is their last attempt, in a very reactionary way,
Yeah.
to try to get some of that back, and it's only going to cause more of a backlash. I think the war, the end of kind of this war of ideas is inevitable, and I don't think that they're going to be able to last with the times. We've had some setbacks, certainly, But I think that your generation and my generation and the ones that are coming up are going to do the right thing ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to hope so. I want to talk on Mrs. Crisby's comment that we like to call it the persecution kink that I
Yeah,
tend to see with
yeah,
Christians. They're just so obsessed with the idea that they're oppressed when in reality that's what they're doing. It goes back to that projection and insecurity of their own,
yeah.
And it's one of the things that always makes me chuckle when they're like, "Oh, I'm so oppressed," and it's like, pfft, where,
Right,
literally
right.
where?
Well, because you're not allowed to teach junk science in classrooms.
Oh God,
It's just such bullshit.
yeah.
You're oppressed because we call you out in your bigotry. Like,
Well, and that's the thing. A lot of the times when they want to say that they're being attacked, it's like we're not attacking you. We're addressing the harm. We're addressing the toxicness. We're addressing the things that are not okay, That's not an attack. If you're taking that as an attack, maybe you need to look inward, look at the mirror and see why it feels like an attack. Because maybe, just maybe, you're the one who's doing these things and that's why it feels like such an attack.
right. Yeah, no, you made a lot of really great points, and I'm glad that like on a personal level that you've managed to move away from the toxicity, that you've deconstructed in a way that was positive for yourself, that you seem to have a beautiful family, and I wish you the best going forward. um, and yeah, everybody, go follow Annie on uh, their social media accounts, and yeah, I hope that you'll come back sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really enjoy your content, and yeah,
Thank
maybe
you.
we
I
can
like yours
do.
as well.
Thank you. Maybe we can do more lives together sometime soon.
Absolutely. I'm super down. I feel like whenever you're live, I'm either at work or going to bed.
Right. Yeah. Now that it's going to be warmer out soon, I'll be definitely doing more lives, probably earlier on as well.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I tend to do them more in the evenings.
Yeah. We'll connect soon for
Yeah,
sure.
sounds good. And yeah, thanks so much, everybody that joined us tonight. I hope everybody have a safe night, and yeah, I'll be back with more content soon. So thanks,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody. I hope you guys have a great night. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, good night.